Now we get on to the big one. Well, this is the one that I really want to see what it is that you think about. So this is Steven Spielberg doing West Side Story, and in any other week, and this tells you the nature of the film world now. If it hadn't been for a Marvel movie, this would be the number one movie we would be talking about this week. But Marvel have gone so big that even Steven Spielberg, please sit down there, take a back seat, and while we talk about this other film, until you direct a Marvel movie, which I cannot imagine ever happening. But, so and yes, West Side Story. Sharon, tell
West Side
us.
Story. Yes, it's the latest. Well, it has been the latest. We've only had one before, but it is a latest sort of stage to screen adaptation of a Broadway musical.
Yes.
So I suppose it's in their tradition of stage to screen musicals that have been around for 70 years that we've seen come to the screen. And so this is, I think, only slightly different in the fact that it's been made into a film before. Most times when people adapt a stage musical to the cinema, it's for the first time.
Yeah,
Whereas
yeah,
you don't
that
often
is
get
true.
one where they redo them,
Yeah, you don't
unless
get
you've got
very
something
many
like
musical
Star is Born.
remakes. Yeah.
But I don't think A Star is Born was a stage musical. I think it was just it's a new story each time. It's remade for its own generation,
Yeah,
so that's
yeah.
different. But I'm trying to think of any other musicals that have just been completely redone,
I
and
I honestly cannot think of any.
I can't think of anything.
Yeah, yeah,
No, so maybe
it,
it's a start of a trend that they may go. Actually, let's go relook at Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, or take something that might
yeah.
have been problematical and say, let's have a look at that.
And it would take a brave, brave person to go to Seven Brides for Seven Brothers
In
and
the
try
modern age,
and,
can you imagine?
and try to. I mean, for curiosity's sake, I actually really want to see that. I really want to see somebody try and do a modern take of Seven Brides for Seven
Yeah,
Brothers,
let's just
but but
let's kidnap all these women.
but generally just leave it. Even if you gender swapped it, it's still problematic.
Yeah.
Like, all right, cool.
That
Sorry.
may not happen. So yeah, this West Side Story. So we know the story based on Romeo and Juliet, but introduced. They've kept the setting as in like the 1950s in New York, and they've broadened it out a little bit. So instead of just like sort of rambling around like the streets, they set it particular into this one area where they were doing things called slum clearances, where sort of mid-century. It happened in London. It happened in lots of cities. Well, in London because of the bombing after the war, but in New York, is basically they cleared a lot of the old tenements, the old slum areas, to build shiny new high-rise buildings.
Essentially, gentrification.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah. So it had the good things about it, and because it was supposed to improve the standard of living for the people who live there,
yeah,
but what it turned into most often was just like slums higher up. You just ended up with high-rise slums as opposed to sprawling across a large acreage, which is what happened, in other places like London. Anyway, aside from all that, so it's set squarely in this time frame of like the slum clearances, and there's this tension between second generation immigrants, i.e., they're Irish, they're Italian, they're Jewish, but are mainly from like a white European background,
yep,
Polish.
yep.
They're second generation immigrants, and then you've suddenly got these first generation immigrants who are people who are coming from Latin America, from principally in this film it's Puerto Rico, but it also includes people like from Cuba, from other
Yeah,
sort of that Latin American world. And so these tensions have developed between this sort of second generation immigrants and this sort of the newcomers.
yeah.
And as happens in all these situations, it's like the people who've been there a little bit longer are like, hey, you can't come in and muscle into our
It's
turf.
well,
When
all these foreigners coming over and taking
foreigners,
our jobs.
exactly. Whereas like the generation before, it's like their fathers were the ones going, oi, you can't bully us because we're newcomers. You were
Yeah,
Dutch people. You were the one. Yeah. So it's like a generation. It's just passed down through the
yeah,
generations.
yeah,
But so into this world, we then have the two gangs, and each generation again forms its own gang. Like the Irish have given way to the Italians, have given way to these sort of like, you know, second generation white European from different
yes,
ethnic
yeah,
mixtures who form the Jets, who
yes,
are a gang, and they're up against principally this Latin American group of people, mainly Puerto Ricans, called the Sharks. And then the story progresses that you have a member of the Jets who has tried to leave the gang life because of sort of incidents in the past, Tony. He then meets the sister of the leader of the Sharks, Bernardo, Maria, and this meeting of these two young people then triggers a new wave of violence amongst
Yeah.
this gang, and that's all set to music. So people know the story, and so you know the story. So the music will be familiar with everyone, like When You're a Jet, I Feel Pretty, Somewhere, America.
Tonight,
Night,
tonight, it's in
I
the
just,
air
yeah,
tonight.
Maria, I just want to go Maria. So you've got the whole, we know all the music, and so it does tell that story. Though I found it was interesting to do a compare and contrast, because I
Yes.
know I am very familiar with the musical and the film
Yep.
before, and so it's interesting to know how some of the songs are in a different sequence. So putting them in a different place in the film gives them a slightly different feel,
Yep.
and how they've tried to make it much grittier. How you can see that this sort of like the real enemy to both of these sets of people is poverty.
Yeah.
And how poverty can lead to a lack of aspiration for someone who's like second or third generation, unemployed, low income, no aspiration. That's just as demeaning as those people who work 30-40 hours a week for a minimum wage job,
Yeah.
and they're still stuck in the same cycle of poverty. So you got one hand, they're saying that why should we do those jobs for no benefit, and then it's like we are working as hard as we possibly can to better ourselves to no real benefit. You're still working 30-40 hours a job in the jobs that no one else wants to do. So you've got the biggest enemies like poverty, and so these gangs have more in common than they have that separates them, but they just can't see it. And it's sort of through these tragic events that you begin to say actually we have more in common than we have that divides us. So it's with all these musicals, they have big themes, big emotions, big ideas, put to music.
Yeah, but so it seems like with this version of West Side Story, because obviously I think with any review of this film, it's going to be hard to take this film on its own merit. It's mostly going to devolve into a compare and contrast with the already well-known multi-Oscar winning version of the film that has already been made. Yeah. So it's so with that, would you say that with this one they've upped the social commentary a bit more?
Yeah.
Okay, so
I would say so. I don't think it's done in such an obvious way, but for someone who knows the original film, again, a compare and contrast, it's, some of the songs, like for comic effect, like Geoff's Krupke, for example, it's all for comic effect. And in this film, it has much more of a social commentary to it because of the way it's set, the way it's delivered, the circumstances around the way the song is done. It's not just a piece of comic like light relief in the film. It actually is it is actually quite a sad.
Well, when you think about the words of Officer Krupke, it is quite sad.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So and before, I think in the first film it is really just a comic relief, a light moment in the drama. Whereas in this, it's actually you listen to words, you think that is actually.
Yeah, it's like we're no good, we're just no good.
We're just no earthly good. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, the two of them, and whenever we have a remake, I mean, there's some of us, like for instance with me, I'm the kind of person who loves the Blues Brothers, never saw the Blues Brothers 2000 because it was sacrilege to even think about doing that. Yeah. And if anybody ever tries to remake the Blues Brothers, I'm going to be like, you sacrilege, burn it.
Away from that. Yeah.
Yeah, burn it with fire. So how about you? So original, you're a big fan. With this one, how'd you look at them?
Yeah,
what's your feeling?
To me, it doesn't quite have punch up to the weight of the original, because there's something about when those films are made, the saturation of the colour. Even though I did always have issues with Natalie Wood, she was never, because she obviously does mime her songs, and obviously she's made up to look more Latin American than her actual.
When she isn't, yeah.
And so some of them, you think, yeah, there are certainly issues with that. And the fact that, some of the actors in the first film don't actually sing the songs, whereas I believe in this one, they all have sung their own parts in the song.
Yes.
I mean, that's a big plus. And the fact that, yes, everyone, they're made up to look, different to what they are ethnically, is obviously something that makes less uncomfortable viewing, shall we say?
Yes.
Because it can stray into caricature, even though they just may give someone like a dye their hair black.
Yeah.
Even so, you can find yourself straying into caricature by doing that, which is not what the film is supposed to be about.
Yeah.
You can't just say, hey, we're all the same, when actually you've put a lot of makeup
we're all the same, but all of you people who actually are from that place, you're not allowed to be in the film.
Yeah. So we're not going to have anyone actually from that ethnic background showing equality and like, hey, we can all love each other because it doesn't matter. And then, but actually, we can't possibly have.
Yeah, it's like we're all the same. We can all hang out and be fine with each other because we're all white. But
we're just made up to look like we're not. So there certainly are issues. I can see why people would be uncomfortable with some of those racial depictions now, because you think, why would you not cast someone who of the
it's not as if you don't have access. It's not as if there's no people falling over themselves with talents to do that. But okay, but okay, so that I agree with, and obviously thank you very much for saying that, Sharon, because then I didn't have to. Yeah. But when we talk about like the staging, we talk about the spectacle and all that, because I do think that there is a problem, and I think you raised that there is a problem with making a musical nowadays, because so much of what you think of when you think of a movie musical was determined in the 50s, and the colors and the saturation and the way the shots look and the fact that you can suspend your disbelief when people start singing, it's all set then. And so when you try and do modern musicals, there's something, when it looks like real, when it looks like it would do in our world, there's something that just sort of like goes, I don't see people walking down the road singing with coordinated, choreographed dance numbers with music piping in from nowhere. There's something in there that's there's a dissonance.
Go.
Yeah.
But I think they walk that fine line quite well in this. There's a scene I think they're probably the biggest dance number, as it were, is America.
That'll be America, yeah.
Because in the first film, I just rehearsed the film. It's also on the rooftops, and it's a bit like but it's literally very confined. It's like on a rooftop, so it's confined. This is like full on. We're going out into the streets, and then you can't. But then the fact that you're sort of dancing and you're skipping about and you're doing your old sort of mambo moves and things, or samba moves. I'm not quite sure which. I'm not very good at my Latin dances. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And then the people who are in the streets turn and look, because in most musicals it's like, unless you're actually part of the dance number, you are deaf and blind to what's going on.
This is just what happens every day. This is just Tuesday.
Whereas this, everyone's going, they're all dancing and singing. And so you do get crowd gathers. So I thought that was quite a nice touch to recognise the fact that these are people who are dancing and skipping about in the street.
Yes.
And people who are just going about their business and suddenly going, there's singing and dancing going on. But yes, it's done. I thought it's done very well.
The musical
was done very well.
So, how many stars would you give this one?
I would give it a 4.
Ooh.
I would say it's entertaining. I would go and see it. I enjoyed it. I went with a friend, and she said, she felt a little bit droopy at the beginning. She was a bit like, I'm not sure. I'm up for, because it's a long film. It's nearly 3 hours long, I think, all told. Yeah. And so she was a bit like, but she said, I did pick up though, and once I got into it, it was fine. Because as soon as I started, I was like, right, come on, bring it on. I'm ready for this. Spectacular.
Good stuff.
I
like that. So I'm keen to see this. I want to see what Steven Spielberg does with a musical, because he hasn't done one before. And I hope, because, all right, so obviously what we do, we started doing this whole thing where we put our individual movie reviews up on YouTube. So you can go into our YouTube channel, Netflix Cinema Podcast, and you can actually see the individual reviews of each one of the films that we review. And we had somebody, or in your review of Riders of Justice last week, we had somebody who watched it. Essentially, people seem to really like your reviews, Sharon, because your review of the Bonfire of Destinies has now gone over 1,000 views.
Oh wow!
on YouTube. Yep. And somebody came onto your review of Riders of Justice last week to pretty much tell me off for doing things. There's a comment on there going, why are you walking around and like playing with your wires and like, fiddling with that box in front of your face while you're doing this thing? You shouldn't do that, blah, 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 blah. And I'm just going to take that. I just said, thank you for your interest and for listening and for watching, because I'm gonna take that to mean that they loved your review so much that they got annoyed about the fact that I did not appear to be listening. So I apologize, Sharon. I
Oh
apologize.
well, I accept your apology, and I probably didn't notice.
Yeah,
I was
tell
just
them.
thinking
Tell them.
about that. It was just in my head. I obviously didn't.
Yes, I knew. I knew I was only. I knew I wasn't even needed. Just had to leave Sharon and Mads. They don't have to be in the
In
same
that
room.
little bubble.
in that
Happiness.
box, in the Zoom box, leave Sharon and Mads alone together.